You know, as teens, we all have questions about faith and religion, but we've all been too scared to ask. Well, here at 1315, we strive to answer those questions so that you can boldly stand up for your faith in everyday scenarios, like over a cup of coffee. So, grab your coffee mugs and let's dive into today's episode. Ben, welcome to the new recording facilities. Got that swanky new desk. So for all of y'all that are desk fanatics, we got a new desk.
Yeah.
Well, so Ben is back. I have lit my Yankee Harvest candle, and now I'm ready. We're ready to go. Essentially, if you blow out, do not blow out the candle. It smells good, doesn't it? It smells like fall.
It does, yes.
Okay, well, I'm super glad.
It was like a harvest.
It does. One might deem it a harvest. Although I'm intrigued because it has corn on the front, but it's not corn. But anyway, beside the point.
Yes.
Beside the point. Or,
definitely.
you know, for a long time, I used to think it was behind the point.
Come on.
I was confused as to why it was like beside the point.
Yeah.
I was confused on how beside the point had any significance. But anyway.
Beside the point.
Recently, I finished reading a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists by Peter Boghossian.
Boghossian.
Peter Boghossian, something like that. And Peter, I think it's Dr. Peter. So Dr. Peter, if you're listening, I'm sorry about butchering your last name. But I don't think he's listening. In the book, he makes a good recommendation as a book that you should venture to read called 50 Simple Questions for Every Christian. And I said, hey, that looks like a good book that I should buy and that Ben should read and I should read as well.
Yes.
So I did that.
Yep.
And because of Amazon's one-day shipping deal, when you spend over I think it's $30.
That's beautiful.
When you spend, I think it's $35. Anyway, I got that book. I ordered it and got it the next day.
Woo!
I know. Expedited shipping. Expedited, not expedited. Speed. So today we're going to answer 5 of these questions. It's a book, 4 of these questions. So, and then we're just going to go from there. So, Ben Young, would you like to take a gander at that list right there?
Yes, sir.
Added a table of contents, and we've underlined them in a very cute shade of red marker. And Benjamin's going to pick one out, and we're going to just go from there.
Aesthetic.
A very aesthetic red.
Okay. We're going to go with question number 14 in the book, but question number 1 for us
How about that?
will be, why is God so violent?
Okay, so why is God so violent? It comes up a lot.
Yes.
I feel like it does. And
it comes up in this form. Let me kind of do a little example.
ooh,
here.
we're role playing here.
Yeah, we're role playing.
Okay, all right, swell.
All right. So Caleb's talking about the Bible at school or something.
I'm talking about the Bible right now.
And I'm a skeptic, and so Caleb, do you believe in the God of the Old Testament or the God of the New Testament?
Yes, I do. But I think I know what you're getting at. But could you explain to me what do you mean by the God of the Old Testament or the God of the New Testament? Because
from what I've seen, the God of the Old Testament is very violent, very envious, jealous, pours out a lot of wrath. There seems to be a lot of destruction and death and loss. And then you go to the New Testament and you've got this God of grace and mercy and kindness. So it seems to be conflicting there with the attributes of God.
So your point being that because the attributes of God have changed between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it doesn't seem all that reliable, because if he was really the same God that they were talking about, there wouldn't be differences among them. Am I hearing you correctly? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Could you give me an example of what you mean by violent?
Violent, I mean, here's what I'm thinking. Why did the people have to have to kill so many nations? Why was why was Israel going around killing all these tribes, in the name of God? Like, what's that about? That doesn't really seem like a compassionate God that I'd want to follow.
Yeah, well, I can say in some instances for sure, Christians do things that aren't in line with what God would say. They do acts they say that are from God when they're actually not. The Crusades would be an example of that. I don't think that's something that's biblically justified. I think it's actually quite foolish. But getting at that question is the fact that, before Jesus came, we have this imperfect version of what it means to have atonement, what it means to have sacrifice and judgment. And so a lot of the times, God would use the Israelites as a way of judging other nations, to the point where he says, I've been merciful to you time and time again, but at this point, it's time for you to be judged. And I think God still today judges nations as a whole, and I think in part the U.S. is kind of pushing that way along. I wouldn't be surprised if, we feel some judgment at some point. I mean, that's not going to say that we're going to, get obliterated by people with swords, but that goes to say is that the people that were killed, the nations that were killed, it's not as if they were entirely unjustified. It wasn't like they were just killed to be killed.
So you're saying they weren't innocent?
They weren't innocent. In God's eyes, they were guilty of trespass against him, or not trespass. Transgression would probably be a better word for it.
Gotcha. So that might have been a question that you have encountered or dealt with at school or anywhere. But that question, why is God so violent? It comes in different forms, but Caleb's, like he said, it in the Old Testament, it was, before Jesus came, there had to be sacrifices that had to be made to get atonement for sin, because Jesus hadn't come and taken all that sin on him. And really, if you look at the whole thing, it's what I usually tell people is it's love throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so look at the effects of what God did in the Old Testament. It all came to fruition in the New Testament with God sending his own son. It's not like God sent somebody. He sent his own son, his only son, to die for our sins. And so it all came together there where our sins were forgiven, and we have the opportunity to go and be in heaven with him. And God had to start that somewhere, and he started with the Israelites, like we were saying. So, yeah.
Well, I think all that in the Old Testament goes to show you what we truly are deserving of. Is we're not deserved. We don't deserve anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing is when it comes to religious beliefs or life in general, we feel as if we are entitled to a certain set of blessings, a certain amount of actions or whatnot. But the reality is that God is not entitled to act according to human law.
That's what makes him God.
That's what makes him God. And people are like, well, that's stupid. So you think God can do whatever he wants to do? In short, yes. Now, is he going to go and do a bunch of crazy out of this world, like, I don't know how to put it, but like what we would see as immoral things?
Well, God is what created morals,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have a right or wrong unless you have a perfect right or wrong. So,
and I would say he's not going to do anything that's against his character either.
Well, no, that would take away his godliness,
exactly,
his holiness. Yeah. Okay, on to question 2, which is question 39 in the book, but question 2 for us. Why do Christianity and science so often come into conflict?
This has been a recent point of conflict for Benjamin and myself.
Yes.
And if you're really close to us, you live in the area, I'm sure you've heard about it throughout school and such like that. But one thing we want to get at is, why do they conflict? Or why do people say they do? Because one of the big things on our website and on the podcast that we promote is the fact that they don't conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So, since I kind of took a little bit of leeway on the other one, Benjamin, would you like to strike up the conversation, so to speak?
Some more role playing here. Oh my gosh.
We can role play.
Or we can just talk this time.
I think we can just talk this one.
Well, I think this is, you could do several podcasts on this, but...
On this single question
yes,
alone, absolutely.
I mean, I really think, so go back and look, and I've done it myself. Why did science start? Why did people start looking into things? Well, it's because they wanted to know more about the God that they were worshiping. And so, science didn't start to disprove religion, to disprove Christianity. It started to learn more about their religion and their Christianity, whether or not it was Christianity, whether it was some other religion. I mean, I totally disagree with that statement. I don't think science, like Caleb said, science does not contradict religion. It very much supports it. And I think over the last 10 to 20 years, that has really grown exponentially. The evidence that supports religion, and especially Christianity, the resurrection. I'm trying to remember who wrote that book about the resurrection.
Mike Licona is
okay.
big on the resurrection.
And then just even Caleb interviewed J. Warner Wallace earlier, if you've been listening to other episodes, and he talks about the reliability of the Gospels and eyewitness testimonies. And so in so many articles, so many scrolls, so many relics are found, every year that support where the Israelites were in the desert, where Jesus was at this time, and it's so amazing. And especially the flood, that has become much more of a argued over event in history that a lot of scientists are kind of moving towards. Well, there had to be some sort of rapid burial, because some of these fossils that we're finding are way too well preserved.
Or they're too high up.
Yeah.
Is the biggest thing.
Yeah. On a high mountain somewhere, well, how the heck would it get up there if it's a creature that's made to be in the sea? Like they'll find a imprint of a seashell on a rock or something way up on, one of the tallest mountains. And it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing is that while I was in Charlotte, I was listening to this guy give a talk on, it was essentially on just the age of the earth and whatever. And there's a big debate between, it's an in-house issue, people talking about, well, is the earth this old? Is it really old, or is it, 6,000 years old, or 10,000, or whatever? And sidebar here, it's not all that important. It really isn't. It's not an essential thing to faith. It's not an essential thing to doctrine. And if somebody tells you that, run away, because, or gently correct them, because they're teaching some things that aren't true, or they're not productive to the Christian faith. End of my side note. But one thing that he talks about, he says, well, even if the time that that scientist gives us, that the earth is however odd billion years old, if creation is true, we should see that things came about on life in the same order that God says they did in the Bible, or that Moses documents that they showed up on the earth. And lo and behold, this scientist is walking through these days of creation, and he says, this is what the scientific evidence shows us when it comes to when we had oxygen, and when first plants appeared, and when did animals start to show up, and all these different things, and they all fit in line with the sequence that is given within the account of the Old Testament for creation. So that's just one cool thing. I think Ben hit it on the head with the worldwide flood, is that there's a lot of evidence for it. and everyone kind of is starting to talk about it, and they're like, well, man, this had to happen. Dude, the Grand Canyon had to get here somehow, and stuff like that. So it is really cool to see that way, and I think the big selling point is that they conflict when it comes to evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what people would generally refer to as the point of conflict. And there are people that even say that, God probably just wound it up and let it go, and then evolution took care of the rest of it. And well, that is a theory that some Christians hold. I don't think it's the right theory, but it is a theory that Christians hold. So there isn't anything that necessarily conflicts about the belief. I think the issue just comes in when where you trace the evidence to. Because as an atheist, if you trace the evidence back to there was no life, and then all of a sudden something random happened, and now we go from a whole bunch of randomness to something that's organized and complex, even at the most simplest state, that was really bad English, even at the simplest state of life, which is a single-celled organism, it is far too complex for it just to have simply happened by chance, no matter how much time you have.
Well, that's where irreducible complexity comes in.
Yeah.
Which is a term that basically means these things are so complex and they all work together. So there is no way that you can take one component out and it still work. Which means, how was it able to evolve if it needs all of these components to work together? They must have all been there from the start.
Yeah. Because
you can't take one out and it still works. And you can read a lot more about that in Signature in the Cell, Stephen Meyer. He talks about the flagellum and a lot about that bacteria. But anyways, yeah, you could do a whole bunch of podcasts about that, and I think there'll be some coming up more about that.
Definitely.
But we will move on to the next question, which is drum roll, please.
Oh, I was gonna see if you could give me an announcer voice, for it.
Okay.
But I'll give you a drum roll too.
Well, I got. And next we have for question 3. Why do some Christians do bad things in the sight of Jesus? So why do some Christians do bad things in the sight of Jesus? Question number 3 for us. Question number 11 for the book.
This actually, oh, look at this. I just got a text, and it's a video talking about the probability of a single protel forming by chance. Do you know what the chances are?
10 to the 70th power. I don't know.
No, 10 to the 164th power. Okay, so
that's like 0, by the way. Like in statistics, when we do it is 0.00000, we call that 0. Like 0.00001. This is like 100, and I mean, it's unfathomable.
So I have this. I got this picture sent to me the other day, and it was quite humorous, but it actually is very fitting for this question.
Well, does it fit in with the question?
I just said it was very fitting for the question.
Right.
So yeah, this is very fitting for the question. So it's this little crow. Not so sure why it's a crow. Don't know why it's a crow.
It's crowing.
It's a crow though, and he's on stage as a comedy, for a comedy show. Which again, I didn't think crows were all that funny, but apparently crows are big on comedy. So it's like a kind of like a cartoon, and the crow says Christians are immoral.
We'll read it.
So he said Christians are all immoral, and then it cuts to another one, and it's a guy out in the audience, and he's like the heckler of the crow. Yeah, and he says Christianity teaches all human beings are sinful. What's your point? And then so the crow, then it pans back to a picture of the crow, and the crow he's got a speech bubble with ... so crow's got nothing to say. And then it skips to the next picture, and it's him, it's like his wings, and he's looking down at his note cards, of all of his points that he's got on here, and it says, the church did bad stuff. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the Catholic scandal, some Christian guy was mean to me once. So, it goes to say that, the fact that Christians would do bad stuff is not, it's not out of the question.
No, it's not.
Because essentially, what they're trying to point out here is the fact that we're not, you're not perfect. And I would say, darn tootin', you're right. Like, you caught me.
Gosh darn it.
The definition of a Christian is not the perfect version of yourself. Because the perfect version of yourself is Jesus. And that's not me. So, while we are changed and while we follow Christ with everything that we have, that doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that we don't do stupid stuff.
Yeah, and it's not, and so as Christians, we recognize that we have sin. We recognize that we can't be perfect. And Caleb and I both, are Christ followers, but we can't say that since the day we made that decision, we haven't made a bad decision.
That would be dope if we could, though.
Yeah, but we can't. It's our nature to sin. And that's not an excuse, but we just recognize that, and we recognize that there's no way to get past that. There's no way to get forgiveness except through Jesus, who died and took our sins and then rose. And so it's not an excuse to do bad things, but we realize that we do bad things. We're sinful human beings. The first sin, Adam in the garden, Adam and Eve in the garden, taking the apple from the serpent from the tree they were forbidden to eat from. No one taught them how to sin, but they sinned.
Yeah, and I think so. Like the examples on the note cards were like, there's like the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, both of which are really bad things, like really bad things.
And the Catholic scandals.
All really bad.
Recent Catholic scandals.
I guess
that's what they were talking about.
Well, I don't know when the picture was made, but it's kind of a throughout history type thing.
Yes.
But I would say that there is a modern, in America, in the world, there is a modern crusade that goes on right now that I would personally compare to the Crusades. This might be a stretch here, but I'm gonna go for it. You can see what I say, and I would say that comes to the whole debate over homosexuality and transgenderism. I think people that call themselves Christians go out with signs that say, God hates gay people and all these kind of like hateful things. And I would put that on the same level as the Crusades. I would say you're swinging a sword by being out there.
Yeah, I think so. There's different perspectives for that. I think.
No, I'm not dissing like talking about it and.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying.
I would definitely disagree with it.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. You're talking about people getting violent. And
aggressive,
and saying
probably would
things,
be a better word.
Portraying Christianity and God in a way that is not true.
Yeah.
Yes. To God, the Crusades, that same value. I think if you're looking at it on a scale of human life, you had a lot more like actual death from the Crusades.
That is true.
Now, if you want to talk about like psychological things, I think there's a lot of areas you could go to. But I think the sin is the same. What you're saying, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So don't get caught up in the modern crusade, but definitely, it is something that we talk about. It is something that you address, and it's something that you're gonna have to be bold about, and you're gonna have to say, "Yo, this is what the Bible says. This is why it's wrong." But that doesn't change how you love people. That doesn't change how you interact with them. It really doesn't.
No.
And it definitely, if anything, should not drive you to pick up a sign and chant that, God hates gay people.
Yeah, that's false.
That's false.
Mega Mouse.
Because, you could put anything on that song, or on that sign. You could say,
God hates sinners, and there you go. You said he hated yourself.
There you go. God hates insert like legit any sin. and then put like ER on the end of it. All right, BY. What's the? I think this is our last question, correct?
Yes, this is our question finale.
I knew you were going to say that in Spanish. As soon as you prepped for it, I knew you were saying it in Spanish.
It would be pregunta finale, right?
See,
I guess. No.
All that Spanish 5 coming back to him.
You know, say Spanish 4. I didn't get it.
Oh, Spanish 4.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So,
sheesh.
Here's the question. Is it smarter to believe or not to believe? Let me repeat that. Repiten. Is it smarter to believe or not to believe? Question 4 for us. Question 19 for Guy P. Harrison in this book.
So, is it smarter to believe or not to believe? Well, I think what they're getting at on, like, I think they might be talking about on, like, a,
well,
I don't know.
Let me throw a wrench in your talk right now.
Ouch. He actually threw a wrench at me that I had from assembling the desk on the floor. So thank you for almost assaulting me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm kidding.
He's not. He actually did throw the wrench.
I did throw the wrench. So is it smarter to believe or not to believe? I think you could go a lot of directions with this, as with most questions in the book.
This is a very good double-sided question.
Yes, it is a good double-sided question.
But go ahead. I think I know where you're going already because I'm just like that. I kind of know what you're thinking sometimes. But go ahead. Continue.
Well, I was kind of going to go in the direction that you've got... we look at things through a scientific lens. What?
Don't hit the table.
I'm not hitting the table. You just hit the table.
No, I said
it's
don't
glass.
It is glass. No, I don't care about the table. I care about
the vibrations.
Bingo.
So you don't want me to do... I'm playing.
He's wild for that.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
So, is it smart to believe or not to believe? Well, when you look at just the scientific side of things, where does that take you? How are you looking at the data and interpreting that? We talked about this previously, but science supports Christianity. Science supports the Bible. And so I think it'd be pretty smart to follow that and to investigate into that. Don't take things at face value. Don't take things that we say for granted. Go check it out yourself. And it's everyone's decision to decide, but it's smarter to take the scientific evidence at the value it carries. That's what I'd say.
Well, I would say, and you didn't mention this side of this, but I would say how I interpret this question, or a way that this question could be interpreted. I think yours is my first interpretation, but I feel like there could be a second interpretation, and that's this. Is it smarter to believe or to believe? Meaning, is it smarter to believe when there's not much to hold on to? Or like, should we just go ahead and believe because if we don't, this is kind of what the Bible says? Mm-hmm. Or is it smarter just to reserve believing altogether and say, it's not for me?
Yeah.
Kind of getting at that blind faith versus, yeah. And I think I was intrigued because in the book by Peter Boghossian or whatever, however you say his name, but the definition of faith that he uses throughout his book and, kind of bases his whole philosophical argument on, because he doesn't present any scientific evidence the whole book. He essentially just talks about how if you have good philosophy, good rhetoric, you can get anybody to doubt and leave their faith, is essentially what he says. But his definition of faith is believing, or what is it? It's an irrational leap over truth, or it's
an irrational
leap over truth, or to trust in something in which there is no evidence for. And he says, so in other words, faith is pretending to know things that you don't know. And I was like, I said, well, I can't personally say that I've looked up the definition of faith, because to me, having faith was always having evidence for what is believed, or having evidence and then going from there. So I was a bit confused with that. So I'd say if you're just going to believe just to believe, don't do it. Like, don't believe just because somebody told you to. Because then if you do that...
Well, that's not true belief.
That's not... Well, if you believe it just to believe it, I mean, you can believe it, but there's no sustenance. But,
so, on a human value, that's belief, but God who knows your heart could tell if it's heartfelt belief. So you can tell yourself you believe something, but if you really don't believe it, but you say you believe it, God's going to know, you know? And I think that's an important piece here. What's your motive? What's your background behind the belief? You know, are you, like Caleb said, just believing because somebody told you to believe, and you're, you know, you're afraid of going to hell for eternity? And that's okay to be a reason to believe. It's you don't want to spend eternity in hell, because I don't either. But also, on the flip side of that, are you, you know, leaping for joy that Jesus took your sins, you know? So I think that's what Caleb's getting at. You got any more cartoons for us over there?
No.
You're looking up the definition of faith.
But just faith, by Merriam-Webster, is to trust. And trust, when you trust, you have something to trust in. And what is the trust? It's trusting in God. But not only that, but it's trusting in the evidence that there is for God. So that's Merriam-Webster. That's about as
academic.
Well, I would say not necessarily academic, but I think Merriam-Webster is viewed as one of the more liberal of the two most used textbooks, or not textbooks, dictionaries. So if you want the new Oxford dictionary definition is complete trust or confidence in something. Again, complete trust or confidence in something. So, having trust or confidence. Because he makes the point in the book, he says, now do you have faith or do you have trust? Because they're entirely different.
Yeah. Yep. Faith and trust.
Faith and trust, the exact same thing here.
Well, let me get at this. So, you know what a lot of people say is that you have to have faith no matter what you believe, because there's no absolute truth to, like, the evolutionary theory. You have to have faith because there's things they don't know, and so you got to have faith, you know, in some things. About that, I don't know where I'm going. I just started talking.
Well, I think people typically say that. They're like, they use that as an argument against atheism, I guess, is that, you know, they're like, well, you have faith in evolution. And they're like, what are you talking about? So I wouldn't come at an argument like that for evolution, because if you're thinking about doing that, I would shy away from it. But I would say
you could if you were talking about faith, though.
Right, but I wouldn't jump to it.
No.
If it comes up. But I think the big thing is you don't just bring it out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because it's somewhere out of left field. It wouldn't make much sense in an argument, but I do think there is an irrational leap over possibilities when it comes to the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
There's a good cartoon that says it's a scientist at a chalkboard, and it's got up at the top, it says no life, and then it says life, and then in between it, it's got a miracle. It just says miracle. And a guy turns to his partner, he says, I figured it out. So that's the first installment of Benjamin and I answering questions. Some questions from the...
Speaking of questions, if you guys have questions, it doesn't matter what kind of question it is. If you're, you Christ follower, if you're not, hey, we'll take your question and we'll figure it out and we'll go over it. We'd love to do that, right? And do you have a place where they can ask questions?
Yes.
Comment right under, can't you?
I do indeed. So you could go on ahead and you could click over to the podcast page and drop us a comment there, or leave us a rating as well. And then aside from that, you could go to groundsforfaith.com.
That's groundsforfaith.com.
Yeah, and that's going to be the number 4. That's going to be the number 4, faith.com. And then there's going to be on the very homepage, you scroll down all the way to the bottom, there is a comment page where you can send us your questions, and then boom, there you go. That's how you get it. You'll soon see it on a podcast, and yeah, so super excited for it. Glad to have Ben over for a good episode of the podcast. Glad you could partake in the new podcasting facility, and we're hoping we can get this baby rolling.
Yes, sir.
Looking real nice and good. So, if you haven't, go ahead and like the podcast. Check out groundsforfaith.com, and also while you're at it, remember that on November 11th of 2018. November 10th of 2018, this Saturday at 11 a.m., there is going to be an event called The Catalyst, and essentially it is a prayer walking event around your school. And yeah, corporate prayer is the catalyst for change, and that's kind of our motive behind that. We want to build a strong community of believers within each school around the area. So, thanks for tuning in today. Can't wait to get into another episode with you later.